Well, welcome to the 20th webinar in the coffee series sponsored by the Greenleaf Center for Servant Leadership at Seton Hall University. I'm Reggie Lewis, the center's executive director, and it's great to greet you from our offices here on the South Orange, New Jersey campus. The coffee series provides the center the chance to showcase the inspirational stories of servant leaders and the endless ways in which individuals, organizations, and society in general can be transformed by the power of servant leadership, a philosophy in which the leader first seeks to serve. And we are so thrilled to have with us today a nationally recognized sports executive and trailblazer to discuss her servant leader journey within the sports industry. Val Ackerman was named the 5th commissioner of the Big East Conference in June of 2013. She was the founding president of the Women's National Basketball Association, yes, the WNBA. And she's the past president of USA Basketball, which oversees the U.S. men's and women's Olympic basketball program. Val has had a long and accomplished career in the sports industry and is one of the few executives in sports who has held leadership positions in both men's and women's sports at the collegiate, professional, national team, and international levels. She's a 2011 inductee into the Women's Basketball Hall of Fame, a 2021 inductee into the Naismith Memorial Basketball Hall of Fame, and a 2021 inductee into the New Jersey Hall of Fame. But of all the Hall of Fames, of course, we're a bit biased at the Greenleaf Center in claiming Val's 2022 induction into the Robert K. Greenleaf Hall of Fame. We say this is the highest distinction, Val, among all of the Hall of Fames. While at the helm of the Big East, Val has presided over the rebirth of the conference, including the Big East fruitful partnerships with Fox Sports, which provides wall-to-wall coverage annually of Big East college men's basketball. Val attended the University of Virginia as one of the school's first female student athlete scholarship recipients and a two-time academic All-American for the Cavaliers women's basketball team. She graduated with high distinction with a degree in political and social thought in 1981 before earning a law degree from UCLA in 1985. Val, are you ready to go on your end?
All set, Reg.
Okay. All right, let's jump right in. I know you've got a tight schedule. And if you could begin by telling our audience, what was it like growing up in Pennington, New Jersey?
Well, first, Reg, I just want to thank you and Priscilla and the Greenleaf Center for allowing me to come on. The award that you presented me with last fall was really a high honor. And I'm so grateful for the recognition. And as I said then, I'll say it now, I really have a great team. I think that's part of your theme today at the Big East Conference office, and a great working relationship with our 11 schools, which include proudly Seton Hall University. And as we all know, good things happen because groups of people make them happen.
Absolutely.
Very hard to be successful standing alone. So that's certainly been my journey. Yes, I'm a proud native of Pennington, New Jersey, just north of Trenton. My mom grew up in Trenton. I went to high school at Hopewell Valley High School there, and still have ties to the area. Very proud to be a Jersey girl.
Right.
Jersey Shore, Bruce Springsteen. Let's talk about all that. And it was kind of an idyllic childhood. My dad was a high school athletic director and shaped my career aspirations in that role. My mom worked for the state of New Jersey. It was an interesting time because it was just pre-Title IX, Red. And I know you're going to talk about the growth of women's sports, but Title IX did not go into effect, did not get passed till I was in 8th grade.
Oh.
So a lot of the sports that I did growing up were with my dad and friends in the neighborhood. Did not have those organized opportunities that girls have today. And it wasn't until I got to high school and then college that they became organized opportunities. But I'm, proud to have had the start that I did, and to this day support high school sports and sports for young people because they have opportunities today that I didn't have when I was coming up.
Mm, mm. And a wonderful start it was. And so we're just curious as to, obviously, in addition to Dad and others, who were some of the leaders, the early leaders you looked up to while growing up in, as you say, this idyllic environment?
Yeah. Well, I put my dad and my mom at the top of the list, as
Mhm.
most many people do. Just very supportive of my athletic and other pursuits. Once I got into the sports world, it was in later, got my first job in sports after I got out of law school. You mentioned my law school degree. The mentors in my world were really all men. There
Sure.
weren't many women
Mm,
to
mm,
look up to and learn from when I was coming up the ladder. But the men I worked for were, they took a shine to me. They allowed me to be on conference calls, in meetings. I did a lot of absorbing.
mm,
Back then, I had the honor of working for David Stern, the longtime NBA commissioner, who really taught me the ins and outs of being a commissioner. There's a lot of stuff that the public doesn't see, that fans don't see, that go into the job. And just being at his elbow for many years allowed me to see what really goes on and how to navigate the sort of traffic cop, air traffic controller type world that you have in that job. So I'd say he was top of the list. Other executives I worked for at the NBA. Last one I'll mention, you notice, the Big East. I had the honor of working with the very first commissioner of the Big East, who was an executive administrator named Dave Gavitt, founded the league in 1979. Seton Hall was one of the first members of the conference. And he was a really capable person who was smart, visionary, political in a good way, just really good manner, got people to agree to things, which is very hard as a leader to build
yes.
consensus, And I learned a lot from Dave. Even though I never technically worked for him, I was around him. And I think as a leader, you pick up things from the people you work with, and then you sort of morph that into your own style. That's kind of what happened to me.
And in a few minutes, we'll go into more into your career highlights and milestones, to talk more about how you morphed uh, all of those insights into your values as a leader. But we know that there are some people who are not aware. So let me confess. Thank you, Priscilla, and all my youngins here who do the research, that you played professional basketball in France before attending law school at UCLA. How did that happen, and what was that like? That
Reg, it was great. I mean, it was short-lived. I didn't stay very long. I wish I did. Looking back, I had prolonged the experience. But just, as a sort of a historical note here, when I got out of college in 1981, there was a women's pro league in the US. It was a predecessor league to the WNBA,
Hmm,
but it was poorly funded, thought to be on shaky ground, and didn't really sort of attract all the players that it might have had it been perceived to be on better ground. So I was in that camp. Plus, I wanted to travel. I didn't get to do a semester abroad when I was in
hmm,
college because basketball is a 2-semester
yeah,
sport. So, I had an opportunity to play for basketball in another country, and the country where the opportunity was presented was France. So I went trooping over there. It was a different day. There were no cell phones, no internet. I mean, my family was very nervous
hmm,
that they'd never see me again. As I was sort of taking this intrepid trip, but it was a wonderful experience. I lived in central France. Um, and I really, to young people today, I recommend the experience of traveling, going overseas for a stretch, however you can do it. I did it as a basketball player, but there are many other ways to have that experience. I think just it's very broadening. You learn a different language, you learn a different culture, you see how others people outside the US, how they think about Americans and perceive us. And I wouldn't have traded that experience
hmm.
for anything in the world. But it was, as I said, just sort of a season. And I had, intentions to move on with my life. So I didn't. I didn't stay beyond that year, but it was really it was a very unique experience, and I'm very glad I did it.
I can imagine. And move on you did. And so we're curious as to whether there was a particular facet of the law that resonated with you in your decision to pursue the legal profession.
Well, it's interesting when I went to law school, I was very intent on being a lawyer. I didn't know much about the profession, to be honest. I was sort of attracted to the intellectual components of the degree. It sounded great. It sounded exciting. I had watched lawyers on TV arguing in front of the Supreme Court. That was what you saw on television. So, okay, that would be great. That would be fun. So maybe litigation would be probably was the starting point. But as it turned out, after I graduated, I ended up in the corporate world. I took a job at Simpson Thacher and Bartlett, one of the big New York firms. They recruited on my campus. The hiring partner seemed like a nice guy. They had a very respected practice, principally. It was corporate. It was everything from mergers and acquisitions to debt financings to
Mm,
M&A,
mm,
bank regulatory work. So these were things that I had no sense of. I mean, law school prepares you a little bit, but not for the practice, that sort of practice. So I started there and I never got out of the corporate department, to be
mm,
honest. I never made it to the litigation department.
mm,
I started in corporate, I ended it there, met my husband to be there. And so when
mm,
that happened, we decided he would stay. He was in tax and
mm,
I would go on. But it was a wonderful experience. I was around, it was fast paced. I was around great minds, great leaders,
mhm.
and learned a great deal. And that was part of my, step ladder.
Uh-huh.
Like, because my next job was also as a lawyer, but, not in a corporate law setting, but in sports. And that job at Simpson Thacher made that possible.
And clearly basketball at Simpson Thacher was still in your blood. And so the next move was to assume the position of staff attorney for the NBA. Tell us about that. What was the motivation to get you over there?
Yeah. Well, I'll back up a tiny bit here. When I was in law school, you asked about what my real interest was. It was sports law. It was being a lawyer in
Okay.
sports.
Okay.
Here's the thing. I tried from law school to get a job in sports out of law school, and I couldn't get anything. The opportunities at that time were very limited. There were really no entry-level positions. All the sports leagues and the firms that worked in sports, they wanted experienced lawyers, which I wasn't. I was a law school grad. I was not an experienced lawyer. So the counsel I got was, well, get yourself a good law job. And that was being an associate at a big firm. It's either that or clerking.
Mhm.
So having those couple of years at Simpson under my belt did make it possible for me to credibly apply when I heard that there was a staff lawyer new job opening at the NBA in 1988.
Mm,
And I now had a couple of years of practice under my belt. I had connections through Simpson with the NBA. One of the partners I worked with had a direct line to David Stern, who was the
mm,
commissioner in his fourth year
mm,
at that time. And so sort of things just sort of fell into place there.
mm, mm.
And I think they saw in me, they were looking to bring in women to their credit. This is 1988.
Yeah.
Thinking about bringing in women. I had
Mm.
played basketball, so I was credible on the product.
Uh,
I was a lawyer that they needed. I'd been at a big firm for a couple of years, got some
mhm.
good reviews from the partners I worked for. And so that's kind of how it all came together. And that was really my first job in sports. And kind of everything flowed from that.
And there's still quite a bit of a gender imbalance in the legal profession. So we did a little fact checking in 2010. Fewer than one third of all lawyers, 31%, just 31% were women. 12 years later, in 2022, this won't surprise you, 38%, only 38% of all lawyers are women. Why should we all be a bit concerned about that? When you think about obviously the added value, empathy, and perspective that women bring to the legal profession.
Well, that's good to hear that data. What my understanding is that there's a healthy half of law school students who are now women.
In the pipeline, yeah.
in the pipeline, right?
Yeah.
And same, I spoke recently with a group of doctors and heard the same thing,
Mhm,
that medical schools, for example, are sort of half female.
mhm.
So I think what you would divine from the data you just gave us, Reg, would be like what's happening as they get into the job and then progress through. Are they? That's what I'd like to know. Okay, where are they starting?
Mhm.
What's happening? Are they dropping out? I will tell you, it's law life is a hard life, as
Yeah.
is the medical profession.
Mhm.
And I mean, this is a theme probably for anybody on this call as a parent trying to juggle the demands of a hard job, bad hours, travel, with the obligations of being a parent is really hard for any profession. I think law and medicine are kind of up there.
Yeah.
And so I'm wondering, are women dropping out? Are they returning after a time? Are hybrid workplaces helping?
Mm,
Could they be helpful?
mm.
But to your point, I mean, that's a big theme for me is diverse leadership just
Yeah.
matters. Our country's diverse. All industries have diverse customer bases. We need to be, making sure that our leader ranks are reflecting the populations that we're serving. That's
Yeah.
certainly the case in sports because lots of women and girls play sports. So
Yes.
let's make sure that we have women in the leader ranks to weigh in on key decisions of any stripe. And so I wish those numbers were better. Maybe there's a reason for that. And I'm going to make a note here to try to learn more.
Well, you've helped us in terms of some reason for optimism in terms of the growing ranks of women in the pipeline, and so that's something I was not aware of. So, and I'm sure them with the folk who joined our call today. Um, you obviously quickly scaled the leadership ladder in the male-dominated space of the NBA. If you mentioned earlier, special assistant to NBA Commissioner David Stern and director, and then later vice president. You served as vice president of business affairs. So clearly, very influential positions. How were you able to lean on your values around supporting and caring for people in these roles? And we often, across multiple sectors, as you know, Val, we're often confronted with these challenges as to whether or not we can hold on to the core of our souls when we're in these pretty tough and challenging roles. So what do you say to all that?
I think you're absolutely spot on, Reg, about all leaders need value sets. I mean, you need sort of core principles that are guiding what you do, how you do it, the decisions you're making. When I was coming up the ladder at the NBA, the big decisions were made by my bosses. So I was lucky that I had in someone like David Stern, somebody who was very forward looking. He believed in not only, the NBA as a product and as an entertainment, whatever, and, now a global behemoth on that score, but just as a company that because of its visibility, could do good works. And the NBA was in fact one of the first leagues to really embrace corporate social responsibility.
Oh.
And so I kind of learned from the master on that one. How does sports help society? How does it bring people together, build bridges? How can we further this idea of sport for all?
Mm-hmm.
So that was sort of in the ether at the NBA. And I guess I kind of absorbed that. But number two, I kind of had my own path on, particularly on gender equity. Grew up in an era where women weren't playing sports much. I was an early beneficiary of Title IX. I've seen remarkable progress on this growth and some say even now explosion of women's sports. I've lived that. And frankly, when I took over the WNBA job, I spent 16 years at the NBA. 8 were on the men's side and 8 were on the WNBA side, working basically for the same people, but a different role. And I can tell you it was not hard working for the WNBA to sort of feel values because you really felt like you were doing something important.
Mm-hmm.
You were creating this league for women out of
Yeah.
whole cloth.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a lot of imagery and messaging around women and empowerment and what this meant for society that the league was doing this and the NBA was doing their part to sort of solidify the connection between women and basketball. So I don't know, that one was kind of easy. And then now that I'm in college sports, it's a different value set because you're dealing with young people. You're kind of in the human development business at the end of the day. I was there. So, I remember how formative my college years were in terms of developing,
Mhm.
I didn't realize it at the time. I look back now, but that helped me become those hard years, those growing
Mhm.
years, those
Mhm.
self-discovery years. I mean, you become an adult when you go to college. And so now I'm in a position to help affect that journey for others. So
Absolutely.
values sort of hit every day.
Yes. And at the time of the formation, the historic creation of the NBA was pretty clear that there was this obvious choice of Val Ackerman as the first president, unique set of technical skills, insights, but also passion for the work. It's important for our audience to know that the WNBA thrived with your guidance through the league's television contracts, collective bargaining, sponsorships, expansion, and obviously championships. Um, if you would share a few of your growth moments, however you want to define growth moments at the time of your helm.
I'll give two, Reg. So the first one is I was sort of ready for the job because I had been working very closely with David and Russ Granick, his longtime number two, and
Yeah.
others. And I was a natural because of things that we did that led to the WNBA, other things we did in women's basketball that I was spearheading. So I do think I was the natural choice. I'd been at the company 8 years. I knew how the place worked, how to, deploy the matrix, if you will.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I really was thrust into a very high profile role all of a sudden. I mean, next thing now I'm having, microphones in front of my face, asking me to explain what we're doing. I had to get a personal shopper tell me how to put makeup on
Wow.
and wear here's some nice suits when you go and do the draft and you present a championship trophy on national television. And so I had to kind of learn a lot. It was kind of like I was here behind sort of behind the scenes, under the radar, whatever cliche you want. And all of a sudden, here I was. And so that was a growth opportunity, just being thrust into the public spotlight. I think anybody who's had that experience, you get a little coaching, you just kind of hold on, hope you do a good job, trial and error on some things. Hope you said the right thing. You had to learn how to talk to writers. That's a skill. How to talk to somebody when your quote's going to be in the New York Times.
Yeah.
So that was, I'd say, the early years of the league, that personal leadership growth work. And then, we had great times there early, and then we had some tough times. I mean, we were folding teams. I was there 8 years. By that time, we were already folding teams because the owners weren't getting the financial ROI that they were looking for. They were moving on with their NBA endeavors. And so just dealing with the setbacks of a new league, the ups and downs, keeping your staff positive, when those hard days are hitting. Some of it was for me intuitive how to deal with it. Some of it I had to get some, talk to other leaders, talk to my bosses. How are we going to tell people we're folding a team? And you sort of learn by doing.
Yes.
I would say that, those two areas would be the ones I put on my list in terms of growth moments.
Well, um, I wouldn't mind, and I probably need a personal shopper, but in terms of
You're
folding
great, by
teams,
the way.
yeah.
You just show up in the dressing room, you've got all these cute outfits, and you just try stuff on. Pick out the ones you like. It was great. I still have some of that stuff in my closet.
um, on folding teams, I mean, I can imagine like without telling secrets of the trade, but managing the news to players and helping them to transition, like, can you say a bit about what that was about?
Really hard. I mean, when in Pro League 101 here is if a team's in trouble, usually the first option by the owner would be to sell it to somebody else. The second, and that team would then either be in the same market with a different owner.
Hmm.
It would be relocated to another market. That's your first and second options. And then the third option would be folding the team. And we did have a couple of instances for reasons I won't bore you with. We didn't really sell teams in the NBA WNBA back in that time. They were sort of all owned by the league as a whole under a single entity legal structure. So you didn't really have to sell a team. You just sort of gave it back to the league and said, here, guys, I don't want to do this anymore. You guys figure this out. And so we did have a couple of instances there where we did relocate. And, that way it's tough on everybody, but the players are sort of lock, stock, and barrel. They stay together. They go to a different city. City decides on a new name, and they just kind of pick up. Maybe they have the same coach. And then the good news there is the league doesn't have to suffer through a loss of a team.
Yeah.
So we had a couple of those, but we did have a few cases where we actually had to fold the team. We didn't have a relocation option. And those were hard days. I mean, for the owner to tell his staff, you guys this is it. For the players, what we would do then, again, a pro league technicality here, you basically take the players and you have what's called a dispersal draft. And the players are just, the other teams have the opportunity to choose which players they'd like according to some prescribed order that we came up with. The weaker team would get the first choice. So it's a business, if you will. It's not a human, it's not a good thing. It's not a good human thing, but that's the way it works when these things happen. And I think the good news, the WNBA has since had relocations. The good news I'm hearing is that they're talking about expanding again. They haven't had an expansion team in a while. So that's, to me, a good sign that there's interest there. There's, robust player pool, so they can stock the additional teams with quality players. And so that's a growth sign to me. And we had a little bit of both when I was coming up. We had early growth, and then again, we had sort of these speed bumps. And you just kind of get through it.
Wow, fascinating. It does appear, though, that everything you touch turns to gold. And that's no exaggeration when considering that under your leadership as president of USA Basketball, the USA men's and women's basketball teams racked up several gold medals during the 2008 Beijing Olympics. From the standpoint of international competition, what was your biggest challenge in that role?
Well, as you noted, I spent a term after many years on the board. I spent a term as board chair for USA Basketball, and it was during the 05-08 sort of, pod that culminated with the Beijing Olympics. So I was sort of traveling around with that, helping run the national team program. While I was doing that, I was approached by the International Basketball Federation to be on their board based in Geneva. So that added to my globetrotting, and that was amazing. That was really cool to be, and by the way, representing my country doing this. I would say, the U.S. is very dominant in basketball nationally. The U.S. women's team is, untouchable right now, which takes away some of the suspense. Women's soccer, it's more even. So that adds, I think, to the allure of women's soccer lately, because U.S. is a darling, very good, but they're not a lock to win. They play the World Cup this summer. They're not a lock to win it. In basketball, the USA women are so dominant, it sort of takes the fun away for a lot of the other countries. Good for us, maybe not so good for global women's basketball. But I would say the issue of women was where I felt the most defeated in my international work. We're, so ahead of things in the USA. Title IX made that possible. We have more women playing, we have more women leading, we have women's pro leagues, we have up and coming women's pro leagues. And you don't see that everywhere. In some countries, it's really, they're 30 years behind us. And there I sat on the board of this international federation trying to talk up women and women leadership, women's basketball development strategies. And, there were some brick walls. I think there's some brick walls. And, that to me was like a rude awakening, because David, I didn't have that. David was so agreeable about and so supportive of women, that to run up against, again, brick walls and roadblocks elsewhere was really just kind of a shock to my system. So I was on a crusade around that for a while, may pick the crusade up again at some point. But I think that how to get women more involved in global sports organizations would be kind of, I think, a long-term goal. should be a long-term goal for people in the sports business.
Definitely a worthy goal. In the interest of time, we're going to shift to our last category of questions with respect to student, athletes, and servant leadership. And the first of the three questions here has to do with, obviously, the Big East is such a high pressure competitive environment. But how do you help to keep all stakeholders mindful of the fact that at the end of the day, these precious student athletes are students first?
Well, it's really on our schools. I mean,
Yeah.
Like the Hall Red, they're really, like, Brian Felt, who's your outstanding AD, President Nyer, Brian's great team in athletics. I mean, they're the ones living day to day the hard work of providing these opportunities and making sure that this balance between academics, athletics, and then sort of development of other aspects of these young people's selves are all kind of integrated and addressed on a day-to-day basis. And it's hard. I mean, these athletes are committed to their sport. They have to go to practice. There's other stuff on the side. They have to go to class. There isn't a whole lot of time in a day to sometimes fit it all in the way you'd like. They want to have social lives. They want to have an off season. So this issue of just sort of time demands and, balancing all these components of oneself is hard work. We do our best at the conference. We focus principally on the athletic endeavors of our athletes. That's what we're being asked to do. But the good news is we have created some other initiatives in the Big East to highlight academic collaborations among our schools and to open those academic opportunities up to not just student athletes, but all students. We, for example, we started a startup challenge. It's kind of a little mini Shark Tank.
Okay.
Students in the springtime, and we get some great pitches, and we have a panel of judges who pick the best one, and we give them a grant.
Who are some of your judges?
These are mostly alums of our schools who
Okay.
have some VC, who are venture capital
Oh, wow.
professionals. So they're used to being pitched.
Okay.
So they, we have a group that come back every year. I'm just using it as an example of ways where we've tried to bring together the like-mindedness of our school.
Yep.
Academics, as you know, we have very high standards in the Big East, very high graduation rates.
Yes, we do.
And so we're nurturing that on top of running the championships for all of our 22 sports. And so we try to do our part. And, I speak to young people whenever I get the chance. I always tell them, your sport career will end. At least you can still work out, but your academic, pursuits are going to be what defines you.
Yes.
At the day and gets you that job of your dreams. And I'm a believer in continuing education, to be honest. I went to law school. I wish I got, my MBA. I didn't. But any young person who asks me to give them advice on what to get to graduation, I say, well, go to Europe, see the world, go someplace else, if not Europe, but travel, and then, continue your education if you can. I just think it's the gift that keeps on giving.
Absolutely. We've got this issue now of compensation being introduced to the game, and just curious as to your insights as to whether or not we should be cautious about anything. I mean, you hear people talk about, old-fashioned values and the purity of the game, if you will, now being compromised or challenged with respect to our ability to build on opportunities you just alluded to with respect to character building, leadership development. The introduction of compensation, what does that do to the game we love?
Well, we don't know, Reg, yet. I mean, that is out there. It's in the courts. There is a sort of segment of people within and without outside the industry who think that athletes should become salaried employees. And that's really being driven by the most visible sports, particularly football, the highest levels of football, and to a degree, maybe the highest levels of men's basketball, because people see or get a read that the revenues there are significant. And the notion, not surprisingly, is the athlete should share in that. If there's a bounty there, they should be sharing in it. So that's sort of the big question now is, would we ever get to that point? And if so, what form would that take? I don't have the answer for you. The interesting thing is, for most sports, that's not those financial revenue outcomes are not there. If you're talking about, and there's a whole list of non-revenue Olympic sports, which are essentially cost centers for the university, not unlike the chemistry department or the theater group. I mean, they're just creating opportunities to play sports, to be part of a team, to represent your university in a healthy way. And so it's not, there's not a sort of, my judgment, if you're asking my opinion, I don't see a compensation component to that. I mean, especially if you're getting a scholarship,
Right.
cost of attendance, other benefits that are now available to student athletes, and becoming part of a community. So that question is out there right now. It's an unresolved question, if that's maybe my short answer to you. I don't know what it would mean. I think it could be dangerous for the other sports, the non-revenue sports, if that becomes the model for everyone. I would worry about the appetite of schools to, compensate with salaries and overtime and workers' comp and all these other employment type, amenities and benefits, athletes across the board. That could be a problem in terms of the long-term viability of those sports. I think everybody in my business is all for whatever the student athletes can get, because they work hard, they represent their universities in an honorable manner, and we want to make sure they get the best deal they can. But I think for most athletes right now, particularly the full scholarship athletes, the deal they have is a pretty good one. That was my deal at Virginia. And I don't know that I would have deserved much more than that, but see what happens in the year. In this question will probably take a few years to be sorted out.
Thank you for your perspective on the matter. Last question before we open up for a few questions from our audience. What are opportunities available for NCAA athletes to practice servant leadership?
It's a great last question, given the audience here, Reg. I think opportunities to be leaders abound. That was certainly my experience as a student athlete at Virginia. I was my coach named me captain my sophomore year. So I was a 3-time captain at Virginia, and I was, back to my points about being thrust into the role at the WNBA, I had the same experience in college. I mean, I didn't have leader training. I just kind of went with my gut. Tried to be, I don't know that I would have understood servant leadership at that point. I think for me, it meant being sort of the bridge between my coach and my team. Trying to keep the team together in hard times, because all teams go through adversity. And whenever I talk to a coach, interestingly, like if I talk to Coach Holloway or Coach Bozzella, I would probably say to him, "Who's your leader in the locker room?" And it's very interesting to hear who they say and why, and I'll say why. And they'll describe the qualities of the people that they're looking to on the team. It's not just the coach. The coach needs leaders within the team, because the coach isn't on the court. The coach isn't on the field. At the end of the day, the coach's job stops here and is now on the players to kind of take it from there. And so you really do need, and you see that in sports. You see who it's like the cream rising to the top. I think, and so I think I don't think you see a command and control leader. College athletes, I do think you see athletes who are well liked and work hard, lead by example, pick the team up, but when the team is down, when they're in a bad stretch, you need one of the players to say, "Okay, guys, come on, we can do this. We're going to turn this around. It's on us." I think that's the kind of leader qualities you're going to see. I guess, and those opportunities abound. And then whatever you do off the court, community relations, service, what you're doing academically in the classroom. I think, the history of college sports is that we are one of the leading producers of leaders, men and women, young men and women in this country. And so whether it's on the field, in the classroom, other endeavors, I think that's the beauty of college sports, and that's why we have to keep them strong.
Absolutely. Of course, Val, I could talk with you for another 2 hours, but I know you will have to travel soon. And we did promise our audience to have have an opportunity for a few questions. I will now ask my brilliant young colleague to walk us through the Q&A portion of the program.
Thank you, Reggie, and thank you, Val, for making time with us today. It's been very inspiring to hear about your journey, especially as a soon-to-be law student. It's been very inspiring to hear your story. So very quickly to get through the Q&A, our first question is, can you share about a moment you realized you were being a servant leader?
It's most days. It's most days in my job, Priscilla, because I know I work for my schools. I know I work for my presidents. I work with our athletics directors, and there are limits in what I can or would do, sort of by myself. I mean, I know I've got to lead in a way that's in the best interest of my schools. So I don't have a specific example here, but I try to listen. I think our schools, they want leadership from me. They at times want me to tell them, here's what I think, here's what I recommend. But at the end of the day, they want to decide. So I think, you naturally, in a shared governance environment, which should be very familiar to the people on this call, I think that just sort of, being collaborative and a consensus builder just comes naturally in this space.
Definitely. So many times servant leadership has been described as countercultural. So how can we make this leadership philosophy more attractive for those who already face many challenges in carrying out their duties?
I think some of it may come from just being, creating more visibility around what servant leadership is. I'm not sure everyone knows what it is. You can't assume, people are sort of dialed in. So I think any efforts that the Greenleaf or any other group that's furthering this principle to publicize what you do, to publicize, the work of Robert Greenleaf, to give some examples of how this, how in practice one could apply a servant leadership mindset. I just, in this world of clutter and constant, like everyone sort of got everything coming at them all at once, finding a way to sort of fight through that and create some visibility for these principles could be a good place to start.
Definitely. And we want to be mindful of your time. So we'll be ending the webinar now. And thank you, Val, for joining us. We hope you can join us again another time. It's always great to talk with you.
Great. Thanks, Priscilla. Thanks, Reg.
Thank you, Val.
Thanks to the audience for taking time to listen. Hope to see you soon.
Absolutely.
Yes. And thank you everyone for joining our Coffee with webinar. Please be sure to take the quick survey as you are leaving and to stay connected with the Greenleaf Center for Servant Leadership through our social media platforms and website for any upcoming events and opportunities. Thank you.